Welcome to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 124 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid. In today's episode, I'm talking to Caroline Rogers. Caroline set up Room to Think in 2013. As part of an MSc in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology, she focused her research on the association between clutter and well-being. Alongside professional organizing, Caroline also has a coaching practice. The learning and reflection within both practices feed and support each other. She lives in East London and enjoys walking, laughing, debating, and learning. So welcome, Caroline. Thanks for being on our show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I really am. Thank you so much for having me.
Caroline, we are going to talk about your MSc, and it's kind of a mouthful, Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology. Oh my gosh, I can't even nearly get that out of my mouth. So let's just brief it to positive psychology. So what is positive psychology? Let's start there. I mean, you've done the whole MSc about it, but what is it and why does it interest you so much? And why do our listeners need to know about this? That's what I need to know.
So positive psychology is the science. It's the scientific exploration of what makes life better. And it's a newish stream of psychology, and it was launched at the sort of turn of this century. Psychology kind of set out to look at what makes life work well when it set up, and then it kind of forgot to do it because it got so busy with dealing with trauma and I imagine that's where a lot of the funding was, to do with fixing people. And then what happened was that this question of, you know, those people that are all right, those people, those organizations, those families, those cultures, those organizations that are doing well and that are thriving, you know, is there something that we can learn from those people and use it to help those of us who are struggling? And the beautiful answer to that question is yes.
So let's then talk about the meaning of possessions. What is this and how useful is it in this context for our listeners? And how can knowing about this help us decide what to keep and how to let stuff go? So let's talk about the meaning of possessions then.
Just in terms of the research literature, what's interesting about possession meaning research is that, again, bit of an irony, it's quite often contained in consumer psychology. So what's happening is that people are looking at the meaning of possessions because they want to help people buy more, you know, to become more of a consumer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether that's strictly true, but it felt quite ironic when I looked at it. In 1988, this chap, Russell Belk, wrote a seminal paper. It's called Possessions and the Extended Self. And what he's saying in that paper is that our possessions are literally extensions of ourselves. So, for example, this ring is part of me. If I were to die, my people that love me, I would be embodied in this ring. Yeah. And he talks about this word contagion, that possessions have a contagion, an essence of their owner. I think that's why it's so tricky to let a gift go. Because when we receive a gift, it's like somebody is giving a bit of themselves to us. And although we might not like the gift in and of itself, we might already have one of those, or we might not like the colour or the style. But because it's being given to us by a person, it's like they've given us a bit of themselves. And so to throw that away or to discard it would be like we were throwing them away, letting go of them. But the thing about this essay, it's really long, this essay, and I've never read it in one sitting. And it's you'd love it. It's an organisational feat. I have no idea how this guy managed to do it, because he came at possessions from all angles, all scholarly angles. So you know how children typically have an attachment toy, and it's the one that we all dread losing, isn't it? You know. And so a bunch of children were invited to come to a research place with their attachment toy. And the researchers had made this sort of magic machine into which you could duplicate an object. So they would take a child's attachment toy and then duplicate it and offer the duplicate to the child back. And the child almost universally just went, no, I don't want that one. I want mine, because it's mine. And there was something about how children want to have a T-shirt that used to belong to a good child. They don't want to have a T-shirt that used to belong to a naughty child. They want to catch goodness. They don't want to catch naughtiness. And so there's something about when we consider our possessions, if we can invite ourselves to really consider, what is the attachment that I have to this? And when I think about what's meaningful and important in my life at the moment, are those two things still aligned? You know, do those two things still match? You know, this marathon medal from when I used to identify as a runner, is this still important to me now that I identify as a pole vaulter? You know, is this me still, or is it not me? Is any of this making sense, Ingrid?
Yes, because I'm trying to think so when people come across items when they're decluttering, it's really important to ask that question to themselves then. Does this item still represent me, and do I want to have it in my life?
Yes. What is the meaning of this? And you'll know that sometimes what our clients need to do is they need to tell us the story. And then when they finish telling the story, sometimes at that point, story's over and they can let that go. And sometimes talking about a possession and the meaning it has for us can help us work out what's meaningful in our lives. And meaning in life is an important part of well-being. So that, again, back to this ring, if I were to tell you the story of the ring, and it was given to me by my sister-in-law on the day that my father-in-law died. And so these are two really important people. And it's like I carry my sister-in-law and my father-in-law with me on my finger. And I will not let go of that ring. I was working with somebody the other day who came across a photograph of somebody who used to be very important and meaningful in their life and no longer is, and therefore able to let go of the photo, having told the story.
So what do you do then with a gift that somebody gives you and you kind of really don't like the color, you don't like the look of it, you already have something similar? How do you then go about being able to let that go?
I think there's challenge number one could be to ask ourselves what rules have I inadvertently set up for myself? And if rule number one is it's a gift, therefore you have to keep it, then perhaps that rule would benefit from some gentle challenging. If you had given somebody else a gift and they didn't like it and they were feeling overwhelmed by their clutter, would you want them to keep it? No, of course you wouldn't. No one wants to give anyone a burden, do they?
Then my next question is, in what ways is it useful to take a positive psychology approach when getting to grips with our possessions? So how do we deal with all of that? Because it's in our lives, it's in our homes. How do we find out what makes us happy and is good for our well-being? And
there's a really lovely offering that positive psychology has brought, which is to take a strengths approach, a character strengths approach to everything in life. And a lot of work, I don't want to get too sciencey about this, but a lot of work went into this. Let's just take it as read. And so there's something about identifying what our particular character strengths might be. Sometimes it's quite useful to have a conversation with somebody else about that, actually, because quite often these are the things that are, you know, when it comes to yours, it will be what is essentially, quintessentially Ingrid, you know, what is it about you that you do without thinking? And is that a strength of forgiveness or curiosity or humour or love of learning or something like that? And once you can identify that and articulate it, then perhaps a question might be, Ingrid, how can you use your strength of curiosity to get to grips with your possessions? If you've used that well in the past in your job in HR or hotels, it was, wasn't it, for you? You know, what strengths can you bring to this overwhelmedness? I know you don't have it with your clutter because you're a professional organizer, but you know, for your listeners, it might be to think about, well, you know, what is it that I do well quite naturally? I am naturally quite creative. How can I use my creativity to get to grips with my possessions? You know, if I have a massive sense of playfulness or humor, how could I use that to approach this difficult task ahead of me? So that's one thing. And then I would say that the other thing is, and again, I don't want to get too sciencey about it, is that there is a massive evidence base for mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness really is, it's to do with training our brains to pay attention. And so there's something about, as your listeners trawl through this kind of insurmountable task of getting to grips with their possessions, to notice what's happening. Notice how we feel when we touch something. Notice the thoughts that come into our head when we look at something or feel something. Notice the rules that are occurring. Notice each time we use that word should, which needs to be banned, in my opinion, after it follows the name of a person, or particularly I. You know, there are so many alternatives to should. You know, I won't, I may, I want to, I don't want to, I might. The more we can notice what's going on for us, then the more we can start to pay attention to it.
Can we then, because this is very interesting, can we then talk about the miracle question? Can you tell me what the miracle question, because it's kind of connected to this, isn't it? The use of words in language, but I think it's really helpful for people who struggle with clutter. So let's talk about, can you tell us what the miracle question is? Okay.
Let's do it. Let's do the miracle question together. The invitation initially is to sit with comfort, maybe feel feet on floor, perhaps raise the shoulders up to the ears, and then put them down again gently, and take a breath in through the nose and then out through the mouth to expel. And perhaps just to do another one of those, in through the nose and out through the mouth, and maybe to close the eyes gently.
Are you doing this, listeners? Are you doing this while Caroline is telling us to do this? Please follow along. Close your eyes, not when you're driving, please.
And perhaps if your listeners were to imagine the particular area of clutter that is worrying or challenging them at the moment, and perhaps that's just a drawer, perhaps it's the whole house. But the invitation now is to imagine that you go to bed tonight, and while you're asleep, a miracle occurs. And when you wake up in the morning, everything in that drawer, your house, that particular area of your house is exactly as you want and need it to be. Imagine opening your eyes and imagine looking at what you see, and in your head, please notice what you see. What is it that you see? Try really hard to resist saying, there aren't any shoes on the stairs in the way, or something like that. Try, if there's no shoes on the stairs on the way, what is on the stairs? What do you see? And at the same time, notice what you're thinking. What are you feeling as you make your way, say, to the bathroom or to where you go to have breakfast? What can you see? What has happened? And then if we were doing this together as a in a formal way, I would now, I'm just opening my eyes, I would invite them to stay with that for some time, and perhaps to draw it, to do whatever feels natural for you as an individual. Maybe it's a drawing, maybe it's a list of words, something to anchor it. And the challenge is always what is, not what isn't.
Yeah. Is that very closely connected to visualizing maybe the larger goal? What do you want to happen?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. What do you want to happen? Along with what's the purpose of this space, room, house, cupboard? But there's something about, if we can see and visualize and get a sense of what could be and what we want and need it to be, then we can find the way to get there. If we know where we're going, we can get there.
Okay, listeners, please, if you were driving, I hope you did not actually close your eyes, because that would worry me. Or maybe when you're in the supermarket driving your trolley around, I hope you've parked up somewhere. But I hope this was helpful, because I think we're always thinking about everything we don't want. But maybe it's really important to start thinking about what we do want. And then think about, how do I actually get there? It's interesting because a lot of our, the people that I meet say, well, my house is cluttered everywhere and my whole house is, I want to do my whole house. And Leslie and I always bring it back to we're very practical, as you know, we're very down to earth. And we say, okay, your whole house is cluttered, but you can't do your whole house. You have to take the small steps, like you can't eat the whole elephant. You have to take it one bite at a time. So if you know where you want to go, and you can't just say, well, I need to do my whole house. Okay, but what's the idea behind it? What's the ultimate gain here? Is it because you want to have people over to be able to visit? Do you want to have people sitting at your dining room enjoying a meal? Do you want to have your grandkids in the spare bedroom? Do you want to find time to do that hobby? Do you need to want to redecorate your house? Or do you want to build an extension? Because I don't know, it doesn't really matter what it is, but I want to declutter my whole house. Okay, that's the statement. It doesn't get to where you want to go. What's the end goal? What's the vision? And how are you going to chop up that project in small bits to do this? And I think that's very interesting. As part of the miracle question, what is, not what isn't. I really, really like that. Okay, so let's then talk about self-compassion and self-care, because they seem like very, very similar words, but they're not, are they, Caroline?
I think it is quite useful to get a bit of an understanding about the difference. Compassion is turning towards suffering. And so self-compassion is to turn towards our own suffering. There's an amazing woman called Kristen Neff who's done a lot of work into the area of self-compassion. And she talks about how suffering is part of life. And actually, just saying that out loud makes me feel better. You know, we don't all want to be jolly hockey sticks and in heaven all the time, do we? We need to suffer a little bit. We need to have a headache in order to experience the joy of not having a headache. It would be highly unlikely to meet anyone who hasn't suffered in some way, shape, or form. We are so much better at doing that to ourselves than we are to anyone else. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't talk to a politician that I didn't like in the same way as I talk to myself, in that self-recriminating, nasty, I'm going to say almost abusive way that we do. That's a mean, you know, you're rubbish at this and rubbish at that. And so what self-compassion is doing is it's inviting us to treat ourselves as we would, say, you know, the ideal mother or the best friend, or, you know, what would my best, I've lost my keys. That means I'm a terrible person. And I don't know how I can actually present myself to the world as a professional organizer because I don't know where my keys are. What would my best friend say? My best friend would say that, Caroline, you're human. You know, losing your keys is part of life. You know, take a breath. Where did you see them last? you know, that's what they would do. Yeah. And you know, I don't know about you, but I find it quite easy to spot it in clients when they start to beat themselves up, and possibly less easy to spot it in myself. But it really is something about, you know, what would my best friend say to me right now?
We are so used to being very hard on ourselves, and that's what Leslie and I promote a lot within the Declutter Hub, within our membership, is be kind. You know, it doesn't always go perfect. It is not about perfection. Sometimes things go wrong, and it's how we deal with that and how we then move on that we can be growing that resilience. There we go, Gren. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great mnemonic for it as well, which is stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to do with that. If we can notice, if we can catch ourselves having those self-recriminating thoughts, to stop.
Yeah.
And the S stands for stop.
Yeah.
And the T stands for take a breath. And the O stands for observe situation. And then the P stands for proceed.
So, okay, now we know what self-compassion is, being kinder to ourselves. So let's talk about self-care then, because that I think is really important too.
Yes, it really is. And the only difference is that self-compassion is to do with our thoughts. It's cognitive. It's to do with calming and noticing and paying attention to those difficult thoughts. And self-care might be the sort of things that our ideal mum might do for us. Mm-hmm. Maybe she might run us a bath. Maybe she might say, why don't you spend another couple of hours under the duvet tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And really allow yourself to do that. There's a positive psychology intervention, which is called savoring. And there's something about, you know, why don't you have a bit of chocolate and really savor the taste, really notice it? When I think about self-care, I always see someone, you know, like sitting on the sofa with their feet up, watching Netflix and a whole heap of chocolate, and really allowing themselves to doing that and really allowing themselves to indulge in it. Or it might be, as Queen Elizabeth said in The Crown recently, take a brisk walk. You know, it might be that it is to, you know, what can I do to take care of myself right now? I need a walk. I need to sleep. I need to chat with my best friend. I need to listen to some music. I need to dance like nobody's watching.
It's interesting that a lot of these things, Caroline, don't cost a lot of money.
No, they really don't. They are absolutely free. Yeah.
I think people who suffer with a lot of clutter feel that constant overwhelm in their house, and that I think plays on their mind. So I think then when they want to relax and practice self-care, they almost feel guilty for doing that because the house is such a mess, and how can I sit down and do nothing? And I think it's so important that you use that self-care, to be kind to yourself and to kind of go, okay. And maybe the trick here is, okay, I'm really going to savor this walk or this reading a book. But maybe it's instead of doing this the whole weekend, I'm going to go and say, you know what, I'm going to try and do some decluttering this weekend. I'm going to focus on some tasks in my house. And then Sunday afternoon, I'm already looking forward to it. Then I'm going to enjoy it and just do it without feeling guilty because you've done the things you want to do. Is that how that works?
Yeah, and look at how, I can see your body changed when you started to say that, and your voice changed. I think we forget that. I think that we should just crack on and keep doing it until it's done.
Yeah.
And what we forget is that if we can invest some self-care time in that, what that does is it's like putting petrol in your car and getting a massive oil check and tire check and everything all at the same time. And then your car runs more smoothly.
Are there any particular positive psychology tools or models that you find particularly useful when working with clients who have clutter? Is there anything you think, oh yeah, I want to share that with your listeners, Ingrid?
I think I remember, I noticed some time ago that there's a big difference between these two questions. How are you? And what lovely thing happened to you this week?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about what lovely thing happened to you this week that when we recall a lovely thing, what that does is it floods in a bit of positive emotion and it puts us in a better frame of mind. And sometimes it can be really challenging to think about a lovely thing, but actually there are lots of lovely things. My husband's Achilles snapped like a twig in August, and we both went, oh, we forgot to be really grateful that you could stand on your own 2 feet. We forget to notice some of the lovely things, like putting a key in a lock and it turning a switch on and a light coming out, turning a tap on and getting water.
Yeah.
Being in the loo and there being toilet paper there. How lovely is that? We don't notice unless it's not there.
Yeah.
I call that the toilet paper syndrome. But there really is something about noticing the good things make us feel good.
Yeah.
And then when we feel good, and this is a bit of a giveaway about my research, when we feel good, we're more likely to be able to tackle difficult things.
Last question for you then, Caroline.
Ooh.
Because you said, I've got some apps maybe that could be interesting for your listeners. So what kind of things have you got in mind?
Yeah, the Action for Happiness has got an app as well.
Okay.
And they produce these calendars with these small actions that we can take each day. And if the app is free to download. And then what it does is it gives you the intention, the action that day to make you feel good. And there's sort of chat and things that you can get involved in if you want to. I particularly have really benefited from the Headspace app, which is a mindfulness app. And there are gazillions of different, mindfulness programs that you can take yourself through. It's 10 minutes a day, and it's all there. If you do have to pay for it, but I think you can do a trial, and if you like it, then go for it. And then there's another mindfulness app that's called Insight Timer, which I really like. And one of the reasons I really like that is because it's got some sounds on it. And then there's various positive psychology podcasts as well, actually. So there's a podcast by an amazing professor called Dr. Laurie, Laurie Santos, which is very much like the Declutter Hub thing. in that, you know, it's the same thing. She'll have a good fat chat with somebody, and it's a lovely thing to listen to. Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you, Caroline?
There's probably loads of things that I'll think of afterwards, but there's one thing that's springing to mind at the moment, which was a story I heard from one of the positive psychology researchers, who said that when he was little and he was feeling a bit grumpy, his mum would say to him, "You're a bit grumpy today. Go and do something kind for somebody else." And I think that is such wonderful advice. If we're feeling a bit grumpy about life, or if we're feeling overwhelmed by our possessions, then perhaps to just do a nice thing for somebody else will make us feel better and possibly a bit more equipped to tackle our own stuff.
I love that. Listeners, what do you think? Do something kind for somebody else. I love that.
Wouldn't the world be a better place if that was our intention every day?
Yeah.
It really
for
would.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's what we see a lot is that people who find the right place to donate their items really feel good.
Because massively.
Yeah.
Because that is the most phenomenal kindness.
Yeah.
Isn't it? When you think that when you take that stuff to a charity shop, you're giving someone else the opportunity. A, you're passing on your lovely essence with your contagion of your possessions. And B, you're giving somebody else the opportunity to really savor and enjoy it. It's one of the kindest things we can do, I think.
Yeah. I think, and that's what I personally really appreciate about like all the free apps, the free cycles, the free goals, the oleos, that's the kind of stuff you think, oh, I don't know if a charity shop wants this, but I don't want to throw it away because it still has some life left in it. So that's where I think if you say do something kind for somebody else, I think that's where, especially if we pull it back to decluttering, I think that definitely helps. So, well, thank you, Caroline, for spending the time with me on this podcast. It was wonderful to have you on as a guest.
It's been really great fun. Thanks for making me think a bit. I've really, really enjoyed it. I really have. Yeah.
Good. Well, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this too. So that's it for this podcast. And we hope you've enjoyed listening and are inspired to take action, because that's what we're all about at the Declutter Hub. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with others. Maybe your friends and family would love our show too. And on our show notes page on our website, you can find the sharing buttons. If you want more handy tips and advice from Leslie and I, you can find us in lots of places. We have a fab supportive Facebook group called the Declutter Hub Community, which is a great starting point. And where you can also find us on Instagram and on Facebook too, as @DeclutterHub, and we'd love to see you there. Take a look at members.declutterhub.com to find out more about our membership. If you don't want to miss our next podcast, subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast and it will pop into your notifications each Friday. We have been asking for reviews, which make a huge difference to us. So if you have enjoyed today's podcast or any of our other podcasts, we would love you to take a couple of minutes out of your day to leave us a review. Maybe that can be your kind thing for somebody else. Maybe you can leave us a review and that is your kind something for somebody else. So thanks so much for listening and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration and don't forget to tune in next week.